And thanks, everyone. Welcome to the February TAC Planning meeting for 2025. My name is Gina Mitico from Dakota County. I'm the chair of TAC Planning. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any proposed changes or additions to what has been shared with the group? Okay, hearing none, we don't need to take a vote on this item. The agenda is approved. The next item is a roll call vote, and that is the approval of the January 9th, 2025 TAC Planning minutes. I think we had one action item and an information item. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those. Does anyone have any comments? And if not, I would be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved. Chris Hartzell, Woodbury.
Thank you, Chris. So I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yep, Drew Flummer, Carver County.
All right, thank you, Drew. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Jed, please take the roll.
Jorge Bernal, Anoka County.
Aye.
Dan Ruiz, Brooklyn Park. Drew Flummer, Carver County.
Aye.
Charlie Howley, Chanhassen.
I'm here. Aye.
Gina Mitico, Dakota County.
Aye.
Dan Patterson, Hennepin County. Bridget Reef, Mac. Patrick Boylan, Council Community Development. David Burns, MTS.
Aye.
Patrick Haney, Metro Transit.
Aye.
Kathleen Mayell, City of Minneapolis. Jessica Hyink, MnDOT.
Abstain.
Innocent AO, MPCA.
Aye.
Kevin Roggenbuck, Ramsey County.
Aye.
Anton Jervy, City of St. Paul.
Aye.
Terry Dill, Scott County.
Aye.
Suburban Transit. Don't have an identified member for that at the moment, but Elaine Katsukos, TAB Coordinator.
Aye.
Sarah Allen, Washington County.
Aye.
Chris Hartzell, Woodbury.
Aye.
Chair, there were 13 ayes and 1 abstention.
All right, thank you. The next item is any public comment on committee business. Jed, did anyone reach out with any intent to make comment?
No.
All right, anyone join us live? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on along to the next items. We have no business items today, but we do have 3 information items. The first one, Joe Whiting will help with, and he'll give a presentation, and it is on the comprehensive planning transportation minimum requirements. Joe, are you ready?
I'm here, yes, and I will share.
Okay.
Thank you, Gina.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so we are getting into that time of the decade. So yeah, the TPP and the Regional Development Guide was actually adopted last night. So this is our next step. So real quick though, before we go in there, we will only be focusing on those requirements that are new or different from the 2040 plan cycle. So I just want to make a note here too. We do have the full draft list here. So if you want to see all of those potential requirements or proposed requirements right now, they are included on the TAC planning agenda as well. So just an FYI, so a few of these we'll kind of gloss over quickly because they haven't changed. But if you do want to talk about those or review them, they are there as well. So, and with that, I will just jump right in. Okay, so first a little background here, just to get us caught up on why we're talking about these comprehensive plan minimum requirements. So as part of the Met Council's role in Minnesota statute, the council prepares a list of system elements for local governments that must be included within their local comprehensive plans. And so this is part of the planning cycle. So we'll see here, So the regional planning cycle starts when we get those census results every decennial time frame. So it's kicked off around 2020 when those census results started coming in. That led into us then developing the regional development guide, Imagine 2050, and then also tied to that we were developing the 2050 transportation policy plan. So out of those two plans then comes our next process here where we're working on system statements and these comprehensive plan guides and trainings for local governments before then the comprehensive plan update cycle begins at the end of this year. So that's where we're kind of at right here in that cycle. Just a little idea of like where some of these minimum requirements are coming from as well. So on the regional development guide side, that part of the plan really is identifying the values, visions, and goals of our region. Then when we drill a little deeper closer on the transportation side, we have then our transportation policy plan, which then identifies objectives to meet those goals, and then policies and actions to feed in those objectives to meet those regional goals. And so some of these requirements will be coming from these actions and policies specifically as we've drafted them and now have adopted through the 2050 transportation policy plan. In addition, though, just a couple of graphics here to show you how these are kind of feeding into the local comprehensive planning cycle. So again, as I mentioned, Imagine 2050 and the system policy plans directly feed then into those local comprehensive plans. They also feed into what we are calling the local planning handbook, which will include these minimum requirements in addition to other advisory guidance and tools and resources to help local communities meet these requirements and guidance. On the other side, we have system statements, which is a state statute required statement that for every community we'll be getting at the end of this year that will identify the specific systems within your community that must be also included in your local comprehensive planning and planning efforts. Drilling down a little bit more here specifically to the transportation policy plan. So as I mentioned, the local requirements will come from those policies and actions in the adopted 2050 TPP, but they also will come from the regional identified systems and what those need to be done in their local plans to acknowledge those. That's their highways, transit, aviation, freight, so things like that. So our requirements are kind of tied to those modal based systems as well. Before we get into the actual requirements, just a few housekeeping items here. So on the definition of these minimum requirements, so the requirements of the local comprehensive plan updates, these are really to be deemed complete, and then we can then review them for consistency and conformance. These are the items that we need to see in your plans to say, okay, now we can start reviewing them to ensure that these are consistent and conform to our regional systems. So each regional system prepares a list of minimum requirements. So transportation is one of them, but we also have parks and trails, land use, water, and housing will also be preparing their own minimum requirements. Other items which are not deemed a minimum requirements is something we don't necessarily need to see to make sure that plan is complete, but we would encourage our local communities to do these because we think they'll make a better plan. We're calling either advisory guidance or best practices for local comprehensive plans. So again, these are not conformance items, but they will be included as a get more out of your plan or ways and strategies to actually improve your planning process. And these advisory guidance, we won't be reviewing these today. They're not quite ready yet. They'll be released later in the year. And then those, again, with additional resources and tools from the council to help meet those guidance. Requirements, as I mentioned earlier, either follow those minimum needs for the regional system as your highways, transit, freight, or to meet those regional policies established in the 2050 TPP. Overview of the plans before we dive into, we'll kind of go through again each modal area. So we'll go highways, transit, biking, seeing that list here. But an important note here too is it's really important to note that the requirements we'll be going through aren't necessarily going to be relevant for every community and won't necessarily be included in your specific checklist. If you don't have a principal arterial in your community, you won't necessarily need to be identifying a principal arterial that doesn't exist. If you don't have transit service in your community, obviously you won't need to be identifying transit service, things like that. So you can keep these those requirements in that kind of context as well. But overall, for transportation, we've got 25 drafted total requirements, 3 for highways, 6 in the transit section, biking 3, pedestrian 1, freight 3, aviation 4, and then what we're calling non-modal. So that doesn't really fit in those modes is that 5 additional ones, and we will walk through those right now. So for highways, we're really keeping our requirements pretty similar to what they were in 2040. Things like describing and mapping community's functional classification, looking at those existing proposed number of traffic lanes in your community for those arterial streets and higher, looking at those mapping and describing existing and projected traffic volumes in your community, describing and mapping identified, funded, and planned highway investments from the TPP, so something you can incorporate from the TPP, and also looking to incorporate any recommendations from any corridor studies that you're currently undergoing or have undergone, or any opportunities to update those studies. So if you think studies getting old, in your comp plan, please identify those, that we should be looking at to update those. One new additional requirement for the highway requirements here is to looking to include a safety analysis in the transportation part of your comprehensive plan of crash trends, data needs, and by mode and crash severity, and really to be focusing these the safety analysis on that kind of safe system approach, really focus on those reducing of death and fatal and serious crashes. Last playing around, this is an advisory or best practice guidance, but we're looking to elevate that to really focus on the safety aspects and looking to improve those in the communities of our region. Moving on to transit, a similar story, mostly carrying these over from 2040 with a few new ones. First, we'll kind of those ones that are getting carried over. Looking to describe and map the transit market areas in your community. So those are what are identified in the transportation policy plan. Looking to describe and map any transit system, including local services, demand response services, transit centers, park and rides, and transit advantages in your community. Looking to describe and map transit ways and any planned transit ways in your community. So those are both with and without mode and alignment identified. So if you have one or the other. Looking to incorporate any stationary plans in that, looking to guide land use density to at least those minimum densities, which are identified in the land use section of the regional development guide, and to also address any pedestrian bicycle access needs to those station areas. Now looking at new requirements for transit in the 2050 planning cycle. So we're looking for, first one here, we're looking to identify areas of known planned transit service expansion, looking for our communities to work with their transit providers to identify those areas that we know are regular route service transit expansions outside of those transit ways. But also we're encouraging communities to identify any desired transit expansion corridors or areas in their community based upon their land use plan. So if you think there's particular areas of your community that will be conducive to new transit, we'd like you to identify those in your local plans that kind of aid us in our regional planning efforts as well. We're also looking for local communities to describe and address multimodal access needs to all transit services within their community. Previously, we were just looking at those transit ways, but now we're hoping to expand that to all transit, so your local bus routes as well. And then finally, also a new one here is to describe and map high frequency routes in your community. So high frequency bus routes are now getting a land use density target and guidance in the land use section of the regional development guide. And so we're looking to identify those high frequency routes and then to be identifying the land use within along those corridors to meet those minimum densities in the land use section of the regional development guide. Moving over to bicycle and pedestrian, our biking requirements are similar to what we were last time, right? Looking to map and describe the regional bicycle transportation network and related elements within your community. Looking to map and describe the regional bicycle barriers and also to include any identified local barriers. So if there's any additional barriers beyond what the regional ones are, we're hoping you can identify those in your plan as well. New requirement for 2050 will be to actually be including a full local element of a bicycle network plan. So that'd be looking to identify the existing local system on your plan outside the RB10 and also a planned bicycle system again outside the RB10 in your local community. Pedestrian side, this is a new requirement for 2050, but we're looking for communities to include a full pedestrian element within their transportation plan. That includes addressing pedestrian system needs in your community, looking to map the existing and planned network within your community, looking to identify pedestrian travel barriers, and also looking to incorporate findings from our regional safety plans, which focus on pedestrian safety, specifically that safety action plan and the pedestrian safety plan. Looking at freight and aviation. So freight and aviation, there's going to be no changes in those requirements. So as I mentioned, we're not going to really go through those, but again, that document is there available. So if you want to see what those were in 2040, we're essentially carrying those over for 2050 in the same way. Moving on to our non-modal requirements. First one here, transportation analysis zones. So those TAZs, having worked on the local level for the 2040 planning cycle, I can understand the frustration with these massive tables you have to put in your plans. So this time around, we're looking to kind of reduce some of those requirements actually for TAZs. And so we're only looking for communities to confirm that their local plan is using those forecasted population, household, and employment data by TAZ as published by the council. And then also looking for local communities to endorse and reference those published forecasts, but you do not need to recreate those tables within your plan. That was a pain for a lot of people last time, and we understand that. And so we already know these tables, right? We have these that are on our sites. We're looking for you to reference them and just acknowledge them within your plan that they're being used within your plan. We don't need you to recreate what we already know. Looking at travel demand management, we'll actually be expanding this requirement a little bit more. So in 2040 planning cycle, we're only looking for these TDM considerations in what we're calling high activity areas in the region. We're now looking to expand that to all communities. So looking to describe and document existing local travel demand management policies, ordinances, or practices, if those are applicable. And also looking to include any activities or plans to collaborate with our regional TDM partners on outreach and promotional activities to support more sustainable travel choices in the region. So that one would be for all communities in the region. Looking at our equity inclusion goal area, so there's a new requirement here around the ADA Act. So looking for communities to describe and the status and progress on their ADA transition or self-evaluation plans, and looking to identify in that assessment and status update is when the plans were last updated and a schedule of the next review and update of the plan. So you don't necessarily need you to include all the details within this section, but just to really give us an idea of where you are in your plan, and where you're going in the plan in the future. So really to document kind of the status of those plans in each community in our region. And finally, looking at the climate natural systems goal area. So, thinking about those MnDOT, GHG, and VMT reduction targets for the region and state, looking for local communities to identify plans, policies, and strategies to reduce total VMT and transportation-related GHG emissions in your community to meet the state statute on those reduction targets for the region for a GHG level and for VMT at the state level. So that was going through all those here. We have a few question discussion prompts here. I'll just read them out and open it up for any discussion here. But looking at those, again, looking at the sheet, the additional sheet that shows that more detail, are there any requirements that are not clear from these documents here that, you get them, they're not necessarily something you can interpret very well? Are there any missing requirements, do you think, here that we're not really including in this draft requirement plan? And then also, finally, if there's any additional guidance that you think would be really helpful for you at the community level to actually implement these requirements and create, really robust and successful transportation plan, your comprehensive plan. That said, I'll open it up for some discussion here. And sorry, excuse me.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone have any questions or want to discuss any of the key discussion questions? Charles, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple things. Number one, I'm glad to see that the safety analysis was being added as a requirement rather than a best practice. That's awesome. I think that safety certainly has shown through in all of the planning things that have been going on the last few years. So I'm glad to see that. A couple questions, not really part of your key questions, but you mentioned high frequency bus routes. I'm out in the suburbs, and so can you define what high frequency means?
Yes, and please correct me if anyone from Metro Transit is here, but I believe Metro Transit defines high frequency as 15-minute or shorter headways. Is that correct? Or local route? Yeah.
Yeah, we typically use 15 minutes as high frequency. We used to have a published thing called the high frequency network, where we had certain routes that had like a standard 15-minute frequency for a large portions of the day. We are kind of relooking at that as that might not be as important for the future. So the high frequency network branding situation might change, but we would still consider high frequency service to be every 15 minutes.
And I'll add to that, we will, in our system statements as well that we'll be releasing to cities, we'll include that network on the system statement, so you'll know if you have one or not within your community.
Cool, thank you. Another question was, under the trails area, you mentioned barriers. The question I have is, if a city doesn't agree with, or if the city doesn't agree with a cost share policy of MnDOT or the county, could a barrier be funding for trail improvements? And the barrier is, nobody's helping us out.
I don't want to speak in a term, but I would, if you would like to include that in your comprehensive plan as a barrier, I don't think we would necessarily have you remove that. I think that's probably a valid point, right? If you can't fund something, you can't build it, right? So,
Gotcha. And then to your key questions you had listed, I would say for us, what we would need some help with or guidance, or what's not clear, is all of this greenhouse gas VMT reductions. As a small suburban community, we don't deal with that much, so we're gonna need some help for sure in how we can address that.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and that is something our land use side. I don't know if Patrick is with us, but they are producing a tool that we will be utilizing with this comprehensive plan cycle to help you measure what your specific community is and kind of where you live, where you exist in that regional target, and then they'll help. It's essentially be a tool to kind of identify strategies with you and with our land use section to then meet this requirement. So hopefully we'll have more tools and things like that to help you actually understand, where you sit in the regional targets and kind of what are the best strategies to actually meet some of these targets. So more to come on that, but that will be something that we're working on right now. So.
And that, just to, if I can jump in really quick.
Yep.
That's something that planning assistants, we're the ones who shepherd in and review the 2050 plans that'll come in. Yeah, we're as kind of Joe says, we're going to be developing tools, fact sheets, worksheets, videos, all kinds of stuff to help with that. And that's the greenhouse gas one, and we've heard that loud and clear from many people many times. So I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thank you. That was all my questions.
Thanks, Charlie. I think I saw another hand go up while we were discussing that. Innocent, or did you have a question or a comment?
That was me. Yeah, Madam Chair.
And can you speak up a little bit? I'm having a hard time hearing you a little bit.
All right, let me remove my. Was just similar to what the last speaker just mentioned regarding climate change, natural system, and reduction of greenhouse gas. The presentation didn't show too much or explain how Met Council will be helping the communities in reaching this requirement, especially that legislature have mandated to conduct greenhouse gas mitigation and assessment, and more emphasis on the reduction of greenhouse gas and also VMT reduction. So Joe has answered some of the questions already, but I just needed how Met Council is planning to provide some guidance or technical assistance to the most of these communities in helping them reduce greenhouse gas, or maybe something that leads to land use improvement or design, something like that.
Yeah, so yeah, and the GHG stuff. So yeah, this is, as I mentioned, we'll be developing a specific tool that will again help each community identify, where they kind of sit in that regional target, and also if or what their strategies are and how those can actually impact their reduction in their community. Additionally, that includes VMT as well. And then, as Patrick mentioned, there'll be a lot more guidance and videos and one-on-ones and other kinds of meetings we'll be putting together over the next year or so to help our communities understand these targets, and then also to begin to meet them and understand how they can actually meet those targets by 2050. Kind of a nice connection, right? Because the targets are for 2050 and these plans are for 2050 too. So this kind of dovetail pretty nicely together. And MnDOT has, I don't know if MnDOT has released the targets for the region as well. I think last month. I just saw those a couple of days ago. I don't know if anyone else has seen those yet, but if not, I think those are starting to get out there. So we're getting an idea of what we need to actually do too, because before last month we didn't have a target at all. We just knew it had to go down. So we now have targets, and we can start building that into our tools as well.
Right. Thank you.
And then maybe while we're on this topic, I guess I have a question about the tool and how this will work. I know when we were developing the TPP, Dakota County is, we have a lot of different land use contexts in our county. And I know when we were looking at the TPP and thinking of comments, one of the questions is, how will we develop strategies for all that fit with all parts of our county and all parts of the region? Will that tool help rural communities, small towns, suburban communities, identify adequate strategies for this? Will it have that context layered onto it?
Patrick, you jumped out. I'll let you tackle this.
Yes. I'm balking, Gina, at the word adequate. The tool we're developing is going to say, here's your level of greenhouse gas. And if we'll have some toggle switches for different strategies, and it'll be graphically show that, you can drop your expected greenhouse gas to 2050 by doing these things. And it's just a demonstration thing, how cities, what they adopt and how they adopt it, that's kind of up to them. We want to see strategies. That is a minimum requirement. We definitely want to see strategies, but how they do it and how effective it is, I don't think anybody knows how effective they're going to be. I mean, we have some estimates, and that's what the tool is going to be all about, of course. And certainly VMT is there's a lot of measurement behind that, but how effective it's going to be is, I don't know how to answer that. So it's the tool. The tool is going to, sorry, let me just pull it together. The tool is going to allow local communities to say, okay, if we this and this, how much does it drop? Great, let's do the first two, but the third one, we're not going to do that. Great, and then they can play around with the tool. The tool is not, it's conceptual to say this type of tool, if you employ this strategy in your comp plan, will have a dramatic or not as dramatic action for greenhouse gases.
Yeah, I think the tool is definitely meant to help aid you in understanding, if you did this, what could that look like, and how could you then meet those targets? So, but I think to Patrick's point, I mean, do we really know what's going to happen in 2050? Obviously, that's an impossible question to answer.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I know nothing's going to be a perfect tool, and these are difficult questions, is why we're still wrestling with them. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure there are strategies. The city of Lakeville is going to be able to see some strategies that they might be able to use that don't feel like, they're not totally out of their own context. And West St. Paul might have some different strategies, or, these are just communities in our county, but where Hastings might see something that they can implement. I just don't want to, obviously you guys know this, but a community to look at a menu of options and say, these don't really apply to us. Or how would we implement this? Some of these things are controlled by other people, like transit agencies or other partners. So that would,
yeah.
That's.
We're anticipating some of that as pushback. Yes.
Let's see. I don't know if Drew was first or Innocent, but I'm gonna go with Drew. Yeah, we'll just go there. Thanks, Drew.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I just kind of want to build on what you brought up, actually. Obviously, Carver County is also pretty diverse in terms of land use. And I want to also get a little clarification on the climate and natural systems point here. I'm obviously personally very on board with identifying plans, policies, and strategies to reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. But are we talking about VMT per capita or total VMT? Because one of those for us is going to be very challenging as a rapidly growing county. I'm not sure there's really anything we could do to reduce total VMT if we're talking about adding 20 or 50,000 people.
That's a good point. I think we are working on the wording on this. It's actually evolved a little bit since I put this slide together even, so it's might be per capita, but I'm pretty sure the MnDOT targets are per capita.
Okay,
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm still pretty new to Minnesota,
total
so not super familiar with everything yet, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, and the MnDOT targets are also statewide, if I believe, as well, whereas the GHG are specific to the region. So this will need to be reworded a little bit to be clearer, but so appreciate you pointing that out. So
okay, cool. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. Innocent, did you still have a question or comment?
Yes, it was my previous hand raised, but I would just like to add something. NPCA is working on updating the climate climate action framework that was released about a few years ago. We're just updating, and that document will have several actions that community can use in helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also climate change impact. So it's something that you can check from MPC website. That will provide some guidance to probably some of these cities in helping them come up with different activities or strategies to reduce greenhouse gas.
Yeah, that's great. So could you, when that's ready, could you send that over to us? Because that's probably something we'll want to include in the tools to help communities. But that's great.
Okay. All right, I will do that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Charlie or Charlie. Charles, I don't know if you go by Charles or Charlie, so I've been intermixing them. Sorry.
No, that's
and
okay.
then Kevin next.
That's okay, Madam Chair. Charlie normally. So we're a city. We have our local roads, and we've got trunk highways and county highways going through our city. These VMT or greenhouse gas reductions, are we on the hook for the state and county roads that travel through our municipal boundaries? Or are we going to be asked just to look at what we do on our local roads?
It's a good question. I don't have the answer. I don't remember, Patrick, I'm not to call you out, but I know that with the tool, I'm thinking it's split out by city, but I don't know how that's determined. You're muted. There you go.
It is split up by city. But in terms of, I don't really know though, because obviously there are cities that have local roads and county roads in them.
Right.
So I don't know.
If you want to call a friend, Patrick, I can maybe chime in here.
Yes, I would like to phone a friend. Please call.
If that's okay, Chair Minico. So I'm Cole
Go ahead. Sorry.
Multimodal Planning Manager, and one of the tools that we're developing, it is the VMT estimates for communities are going to be based on trips to start or end in your community. So it's not really tied to roadway system. And what we're looking at is, a lot of the strategies that cities might be implementing could be more on the land use side. So there's no tie specifically to like you're reducing VMT on a certain type of road. It's more that, are there decisions that you as a community can make that reduce the VMT that your residents or destinations are creating within your community? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cole.
All right, Kevin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I hate to bring it up, but I've been tracking a little bit of Trump's executive orders. There are a number of them, and some of them are focused on what he called the Green New Deal. I don't know exactly what the impact is on our planning efforts here, was specifically to greenhouse gases and other things, but wanted to ask council staff if they're kind of tracking these issues, and does that change what needs to go into the transportation policy plan and what we provide as local governments in our plans? I know this is all evolving and changing, and we're all kind of trying to figure out what it means, but just wanted to bring that up and ask if y'all are keeping an eye on that. Thanks.
Cole, I might let you jump into this one again.
Sure. And I guess I'll Amy on. She might want to chime in too. But yes, we are tracking the impacts of federal bills to the federal planning process. Would note that all of this is about our state planning process. So I don't think we're anticipating, changing anything in the long range plan if it applies to a state process. But whether we can require things federally, under our federally MPO role, through things like funding programs through the solicitation, I think that's evolving as we get new guidance. But most of the things we're requiring here are driven by regionally developed policy, in which the feds give you a lot of autonomy to do that, and then it's applying it to a state law. So unless we see a substantial change in the state law policy, then we're not really looking at changing much that we're requiring here for the state planning requirement. But to your point, Kevin, we are looking at a lot of these for the more federal oriented processes that we administer as the MPO, and we're in like a webinar a day to kind of keep track of what's happening in that sphere.
All right, thank you, Cole. I just know that there are decisions going to be made tied to funding, yeah, just wanted to make sure you guys were all aware of that, and I'm sure you are. Thanks.
Right. Good questions and discussion. Anyone else have anything they want to ask or chime in on? I do have one just question about process, Joe. So this is an information item for us. Who does act on it, or what is the process for getting this finalized? Does it go through the Met Council, or does TAB see this? Do they vote on it, or is it more information?
So we're currently bringing these around to various committees to get the information out and to solicit some initial feedback and see again some of these key questions. We'll be going to the pedestrian bicycle working group in a couple of weeks. We're at the transit advisory committee. We'll be bringing this to transportation committee as an information item as well. Just get this out there. But how I'm aware of the process, this isn't something that gets approved by TAB or anything like that. This is kind of part of our planning process with the regional development guide. And I've been told that these minimum requirements need to be finalized by the end of April. And then we'll be developing some of those best practice advisory guidance throughout the summer. And then those will be likely released kind of toward the end of the year. And then that kind of kicks off then the local planning cycle, which, Patrick, I believe technically starts in the end of this year, or is it September? Because I know we were releasing system statements in September. Maybe he's not there anymore, but
yeah. Sorry. We'll release system statements in September, and the statute says years ending in 5, so 2025.
Okay.
And then local communities, which is counties, cities, and townships, are required to complete their update by the end of years ending in 8. So generally speaking, It's 3 years. It's actually a little bit more than 3 years, but 3 years from the fall of 2025 until December of 2028.
And then, Patrick, like next year, we'll be doing a lot of additional information and help and guidance and things like that with these kind of informational meetings, things like that, right? And just to kind of get people kicked off and get these processes moving at the local level.
Yeah, we're on our website. My work unit is responsible for updating what's called the local planning handbook, and there's lots of information. Most of it is geared around. It's all divided by 188 individual cities, counties, and townships. You can drop down and pick whatever you want. And then there's policy information. It's right now currently centered around Thrive MSC 2040. Last night the council adopted rather, Imagine 2050. So we'll be in the process of updating all our tools and resources. But we also have, besides the handbook, we also have a pretty robust education outreach component called Plan It. And per what Joe said earlier, we'll be having virtual and in-person events. We'll be recording webinars and having fact sheets and interactive tools and things like that for people to use. And yes, that's already starting. We'll be publishing some of that simultaneously with the system statement and then into 2026.
Thank you, Patrick. Cole, do you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, add on to what Joe was saying, that all the adoption of these requirements was done through the plan itself. And this, to me, seems like a really good conversation for you all that then go and have to interpret this. So, the purpose of this is really to get feedback on, does it make sense? Do you need help? We weren't necessarily envisioning a presentation to TAB, but just hearing you ask that question, I'm just wondering, are there pieces of this that you think would be worth bringing to them where, you're really more at the staff level that are going to work on these plans day to day? You're the ones that we're looking for feedback for at this point. But are there anything from this that you think would be worth taking to TAB for their I think at that point, it's more of an FYI, your staff are hearing about this. So there's not like we're looking for policy direction, but maybe just to make them aware of what you all are all seeing. I wouldn't want to take this full long presentation, but is there any pieces in particular that you all think would be worth bringing to them? The GHGs is maybe one that's already come up because there was a lot of discussion around that.
Yeah, just hearing my own policymakers talk, the GHG discussion is, I think one that everybody has questions about in terms of how it will work and how it will affect growing communities. How you would bring that to them and not the whole thing, I guess that's a little bit of a more difficult discussion. So I guess I was just curious, and also just for my own information about how much to inform up about this, if this is coming their way or not. But yeah, and I haven't been part, I don't think I've worked, the last time this happened, I worked for not a city or county, so I don't really know how this plays out at the ground level. So I'm kind of curious if others have more experience and feedback.
I could put my local government hat on for a second. So when I was doing the plan for Shakopee in 2018, the checklist was there. You just kind of went through your checklist, and if you're missing something, I remember I was missing because Shakopee is within the service area or the influence area of Flying Cloud. We didn't have an aviation element of our plan, so that got kicked back to us, and then we said we had to put that in there. And it's pretty clear, what we needed to put in there, and then once we put that in there, it was okayed. So that's kind of what I'm thinking it'll be similar to this. So this list, you'll have each community have their own customized list, which will exactly what's, if you're within an airport influence area, right, you'll have the airport requirements. If you have a principal arterial, you have those kind of elements, and it'll be tailored for each city. System statements will be tailored too. So if you have those maps and all those tools as well. So hopefully it'll be clear once these documents start to come out. But it looks like, yeah, Patrick's got that right there. So yeah, that's the checklist will look similar to this probably. So you'll be clear that, you can say, okay, we got that in our plan, done. We got this, we're done, and then you can prepare to submit the plan. So then hopefully you've covered all those.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. Pause for a second, just to make sure. All right, well, thanks. That was a lot of good information and some good discussion. And I think we're going to continue talking about greenhouse gas and, well, I guess climate change and other multimodal measures with Tony. So maybe not specifically greenhouse gas. That's our next item. So we'll move on to that. Tony, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll note, I think this one was supposed to go to TAC last month. It got bumped to focus on the regional solicitation evaluation. So this has not been yet heard from TAC. We'll be the first, I think, committee or subcommittee to hear this. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Tony.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Nice to be with everybody. Today, my name is Tony Fischer, Transportation Planner in MTS, and we did hire ICF to help us with this work, and Stephanie Kong, the ICF project manager, is with us today in case I run into any hard questions. So this is the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measures project, and the intent of this project was to really look at where we were measuring greenhouse gases and make recommendations to improve that, and then also to create some methodologies from scratch to help us in other places. So specifically, we have reported greenhouse gases in the TPP in the past. There are recommendations to improve that. And then we have not reported greenhouse gas emissions on regional solicitation projects and in the TIP. And so we worked through those three products. So with the regional solicitation, it did get pretty detailed, and we are producing a guide that has references and has quite a bit of details on the work we've done, the recommendations we're making. And this work was done in consultation with state agencies and local partners through a project management team and a technical advisory committee. So this presentation and the project followed this general approach. we had project management. We started out really the project with inventorying the current methods. And in the case of regional solicitation and TIP, we looked at what information was available that could help us. We looked at best practices across the country. We drafted recommendations for methodologies and worked through those with stakeholders. And then ICF made some recommendations on some greenhouse gas inventory work that we had done in the past as a kind of a foundation for the effectiveness of different strategies. And then in task 6, there's some implementation work being done. So first, a look at the current methods. With the regional solicitation, there were no direct greenhouse gas emissions estimates, but there were some useful parts. VMT specifically was reported in the case of transit projects and TDM projects. The highway projects, a lot of the highway projects required synchro outputs, which includes or can include an estimate of fuel consumption. And so that was promising because there's a pretty direct link between burning gasoline or diesel and the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted. And then while traffic speed was considered in the regional solicitation, it really was considered in the opposite way that you'd consider it when you're thinking about induced demand. It was obviously considered as a benefit to the traveling public, but from a perspective of induced demand, it would be a disbenefit. We looked at the TIP and the information that was available, tried to sort through some of that and think about ways that that could be used to produce greenhouse gas estimates. And then we looked at the time we had the 2040 TPP model, and that's the model that we use. We take in the transportation network, land uses, population, jobs, and export a number of different performance measures. We also used EPA's MOVES model to convert changes in VMT to changes in greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants. And then we did a deep dive on how the model was handling induced demand. And just to note that construction emissions aren't considered in the TPP work with the regional model. So we went out and looked at best practices. A lot of those happen to come from California just because they're ahead of the curve on dealing with some of these things. They've got more time and more resources invested in this. We looked at some national resources, and then we did look at the recent work that MnDOT did with their carbon reduction strategy. Some of the differences we found in the different methodologies that are out there, some of the methods export really tailpipe emissions only, and other ones are really trying to capture a well-to-wheels emissions estimate. And that's important. I think notably when you think about electric vehicles, they're zero tailpipe emission vehicles. However, that electricity generation can and often does have greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. Some of the methodologies really estimated emissions, taking in before and after activity and estimating emissions in both cases and then calculating the difference. Other methodologies used some kind of an elasticity factor to apply to an activity, kind of a percentage change that results from the activity. And then some methods, say for transit, really captured the benefit of reducing VMT, but didn't capture necessarily the potential disbenefit of using a diesel bus. And we were definitely trying to get at a comprehensive look of those emissions. Another way where some methods were incomplete is that they assume that all, say, transit ridership or all new bike riders on a facility represented reduced VMT. And then we wanted to, there's some methods that reflected that, some of those trips didn't come from SOVs. Some of those trips came from very sustainable modes. And so it's not a big adjustment, but there's a small adjustment factor available to consider that. And then some methods resulted in a percentage change in emissions on an overall number. And then other ones really try to get at tons of GHG emissions change. And that's just useful for different purposes. So the methods that we recommended did incorporate feedback. We had discussions with MnDOT around the tip. We had a few meetings with mostly council staff, but also Jim Hendrickson from MnDOT about how the TPP estimates greenhouse gas emissions. We had 5 working groups to represent different parts or potential parts of the regional station process. So just the traditional transit, bike ped, TDM and roadways groups, and then we added in electrification to consider the possibility of that kind of a category coming to fruition. So those are the 5 categories of projects where we try to develop these methods to estimate greenhouse gas emissions. In all cases, we're balancing the effort against the precision and completeness of the estimates. I think we all know that's especially important when it comes to the regional station. There's a lot of effort that goes into those applications already, and we're really trying to manage that effort. We did attempt to, even within that constrained effort, we did attempt to get at a full well-to-wheels emissions estimate. And sometimes we used factors for that, and they're just different kind of shorthand ways to do that. We did, as I touched on earlier, we tried to capture any benefits to emissions, but also the disbenefits to emissions in a number of different categories. There are just pluses and minuses that want to be considered to get at a full estimate. And then we're using a lot of national best practices. We're using parameters that we found in research. Sometimes those don't represent Minnesota and don't represent Minnesota very well. And so there's just, there's going to be ongoing work to update those factors. And then in a couple cases, it's going to be really useful to ask project applicants to collect some before and after information from implementing their projects to improve our methods over time. So within transit, we're taking in those transit forecasts. Like I said, we're kind of reflecting that not all those new transit riders came from single occupancy vehicles. We are trying to reflect, is that a diesel bus or is that an electric bus? And then we made an adjustment. I think the transit applications were considering really a transit route length, and we're using more of a VMT, a typical VMT per trip length, and then that varies by community type. So really better reflect the trips that people are taking. And really, this method depends heavily on that transit ridership figure. So if there's a desire to improve on this methodology, that might be the place to start. Again, that's a lot of work to get to a good ridership number, so that we might be kind of where we want to be, where we're balancing kind of the effort with the completeness and precision of the estimate. So for travel demand management, we considered a couple categories of projects. There are projects that are really aimed at that commuter trip reduction. And then the project sponsors are reporting the number of trips that they're aiming to reduce. And so from that, it's a pretty straightforward line to estimate the fuel consumption based on the fleet and get an emissions factor for that, and get at the greenhouse gas emissions. And then again, we're varying the VMT that each of those trips represents. We're varying that by community type, recognizing that different parts of the region have different typical trip distances. Within TDM, we also considered shared mobility projects. And so we looked at kind of population within a 3-mile area. As we'll see, there's that's something we're still looking at, whether that 3 is the right number or not. But we had an elasticity factor that varied based on the shared mobility type of vehicle that applied to that population to get at kind of the usage, and then the VMT that represented, and the greenhouse gas emissions. And that research did reflect deadhead miles for different shared mobility projects. So within the bike ped category, we really start out with ADT on the road or a nearby road to represent how busy that corridor is. And then we had some research that showed, based on different types of improvements, the percentage of mode shift we could expect. And so that's really the first part of the mode shift that leads to VMT reduction, that leads to greenhouse gas reduction. The second part of this is this method would reflect key destinations in a corridor. And so that's the research looked at these key destinations that are listed here and really demonstrated the value of these and gave us factors to apply to that ADT. However, we don't have our own map of these regional destinations, so it could be supplied by the applicant. It could be work that Met Council staff need to take on to build that agreed upon map to fully implement that method. Within electrification, so we're really comparing the greenhouse gas emissions from an electric vehicle to an internal combustion vehicle and typical VMTs for those vehicles. We are considering the upstream electricity generation. We're in a good place in Minnesota where we are working towards really clean electricity. By, I think, 2040, we're supposed to be kind of towards net zero on our electricity generation, with some exceptions. So that's a good thing for electrification. In both the project types under electrification, there's going to be some value in collecting more information. When we think about public charging, we considered kind of how the amount of power that was available from that, and then importantly, how many hours of the day that that charger is going to be used. And so that usage number becomes really important. And we can use numbers from different places, but we might benefit a lot from collecting local information on that too. And then when we talk about outreach events, we had a sample size of one event where they collected information on people's attitudes towards EVs before and after the event, and attitudes and knowledge base and likelihood to purchase. And from that, they estimated a conversion rate of 4%. People were more likely to buy an electric vehicle than before. And so we use that to calculate. But again, it's a sample size of one. Is if we do more of these events and we can capture kind of before and after survey data, we can try to improve that number. And then we really were focused on light duty vehicles, and we could start to think about medium and heavy duty vehicles in the future. Roadways became challenging. We thought Synchro looked really good because it exports a estimate of fuel usage, which in theory is pretty straightforward to convert to greenhouse gas emissions. We updated some of the emission factors. We found that not all applications seem to have both the no build and build models attached. So we had a hard time when we went back and looked at old applications, we want to be able to compare the no build and build scenario to reflect the differences there. So we just had that challenge there. And then we did add in a component to consider induced demand based on changes in corridor speeds. So for the TPP, we did that deep dive on induced demand, and I think we demonstrated that the regional model does reflect really well the short-term impacts of induced demand, but probably not necessarily the long-term impacts. And it made sense when we thought about it, because those long-term impacts have more to do with land use, and we're not running the travel demand model back. Those results are not going back into the land use model and kind of running that through that circle. So it made sense that we're capturing about half of that induced demand in the TPP. There are different ways to address that, and I'll leave that to others on how we actually are going to proceed on that. We did some updates on the EV forecast just based on current information that's out there. So we tried to apply some factors to represent kind of the full life cycle of different vehicles and fuels. And then we proposed that we could consider construction emissions, although I think that needs to be thought through a little bit more, whether, would that lead us to better decision making? Is that important or not? Because it is effort for sure. When it comes to our tip, we found that we just don't have enough information in the tip to produce a reliable greenhouse gas emission estimate. There are project descriptions, there are project costs, but there really isn't a detailed understanding of what's being built in a lot of these projects. And so we want to have more conversations with MnDOT and other project sponsors about, could project sponsors provide that information? A lot of cases, if they're doing an environmental document, they're providing that estimate already. I think MnDOT, for most projects over about $1 million, they're providing a greenhouse gas impact estimate already. So should we just be reporting other estimates that are, they're going through a lot more work and they're going to have better numbers anyway, probably. So yeah, more discussion needed on that. We looked at a couple of different efforts here in the council that we've made to estimate greenhouse gases for the region in the transportation sector. And there were just a number of recommendations on those inventories around how vehicle miles traveled is accounted for, how do we get to that full well-to-wheels estimated greenhouse gas emissions, some new emission factors available from the EPA, how to consider embodied emissions, and then the EV forecasts is an area that's been fast moving, and there are a lot of different forecasts out there, and different laws have changed over time. Those forecasts have needed to be updated. So just trying to reflect the most current information as of a few months ago, which is no longer current probably. So we wanted to implement these methodologies both to help us make this easier to do the work, but then also just to test out the results and see if they seemed reasonable. So ICF built an R-based mapping tool, an online mapping tool that can actually run these methodologies. This is publicly available. It's to be determined whether this would be Met Council staff or project staff that would input data here. But it asks for the required information. It exports the GHG and VMT estimates, and it's based on VMT in different parts of the region, population down to a pretty pretty detailed area, and that's available now for beta testing. If anybody wants to take a look at that, the website's listed at the bottom of that page there. And that's really a tool that we foresee being useful. We intentionally built it in a way that we can maintain it and update it as we want to change our methods, as we want to update those different factors. For roadways, we started with the synchro outputs. That's really a high-level planning tool, but I think a lot of people think that's a lot of effort for a regional solicitation application, so it's probably the upper bound. But we did want to test it with a more detailed model. So we took those synchro models in a few cases and brought those into some traffic and tried to run those through some traffic. And here's an example case. We're getting pretty different results from synchro and some traffic. We also looked at a CMAQ tool that does this, and we got pretty different results. So we're definitely not confident in the greenhouse gas emission estimates we're getting for roadway projects, but we do have a path forward, hopefully. I'll touch on that a little bit. But first, some of the initial results we're getting from the tool, you can see kind of the range of greenhouse gas reduction estimates we're getting from different project types. That one outlier at the top end of the transit bar represents a large mobility hub. And that's where we're looking into that 3-mile population radius. 3 miles might make sense when you think about car sharing, if somebody were to bike to that mobility hub, but it probably makes less sense for other types of shared mobility. So yeah, that's definitely an area we want to do some more work on. So some of the other next steps, so this project's winding down, but it's just going to be starting up a conversation with the regional substation evaluation project as to how we implement this in the regional substation. And I think they're just going to be a lot of options. There's going to be probably some areas we can do some more work to improve some of these methods. But that group's going to be really important to getting us from here to the actual application measures. We have that tool. We want to keep maintaining it and updating it. Let's see. I mentioned that in a number of project cases, we're going to really benefit from having local data. You know, if we can build that database over time, we're going to improve these methods. For the roadway projects, because of the uncertainty in those estimates, you know, one potential avenue is really to look at places where people have done more detailed evaluation of different roadway types, whether it's interchanges or 2 to 4 lanes, and try to build a small database of, you know, kind of what's the range of estimates that they're getting from those projects. You know, if they're going through a very detailed environmental document and coming up with an estimate, they're doing a lot more work than we can ever do in our application process. But they might have a kind of a range of values that we could start to apply to interchanges. And maybe it's scaled up or down by ADT, and maybe it needs to represent, you know, we need a number that represents kind of a rural safety project interchange, and a different number that represents more of a congestion-driven interchange. But I think we have a path forward on that. And then we're lucky that Minnesota's done a lot of work to improve on the federal infrastructure carbon estimator with the Minnesota infrastructure carbon estimator to estimate the embodied carbon emissions in our construction projects. So an interchange might cause some travel changes, induce demand, some operational benefits, but it also has quite a bit of embedded steel and concrete and other embedded greenhouse gas emissions that might want to be considered. So we had a couple discussion questions in the agenda to start things off, but you know, we're really trying to develop these methods so that the regional solicitation process can reflect greenhouse gas emission impact. And so if you see other weaknesses in this process or have recommendations for other future work we should do to really fill in gaps, I'd appreciate that.
All right, thanks, Tony. Yeah, so there were some discussion questions in the agenda, and I'll just read them again. Tony, you mentioned them, but the first one being, are there weaknesses in the methods that could use more work or improvement, and is there future work needed to fill in the gaps? So I will throw those out there, but I'll also just open it up to the group and see if there's any questions or comments. And Jed put the questions in the chat, so thank you, Jed. You stumped us, I think.
I think the work group, the regional solicitation evaluation work group is going to have a lot to say about some of this.
Okay, and is that a group you have been to already, or someplace you're going next?
I think as part of the regional solicitation evaluation projects, I think there's going to be some subgroups that are going to work on, you know, specific parts of that, those methodologies that score safety, that score different things.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Innocent.
Yes. I'm a member of the project management team with Tony. And what I seem to notice with the working through this studies is the need for local specific data. We seem to be struggling with that, and now we have some funding maybe from carbon reduction program. I don't know whether it is possibility of using that grants or that funding for us to obtain some of the local data that we need. For example, PCA is supposed to provide the region with auto mix information, and this data is supposed to get them from Department of Public Safety, but it's always difficult to get the data from them, and in most cases we have to do a lot of work to make it usable, and not it takes some time, especially with the staff that we have. Sometimes most of the staff we have PCA, the one that works on those, collecting those data and modifying them, end up leaving or move to a different unit, and we have to start training some other person to take it. So we've been struggling with that. So I was been wondering, say, if we get some funding from like the carbon reduction program, and maybe we can hire a consultant or have some ways of paying to get those data so we can easily be used for some of the studies or research we're doing within the region or the state. I don't know if Met Council has anything to say about that.
In essence, I'm aware that it's hard to get vehicle registration data from DPS, and it's hard to use that data once you get it. I think the data I'm referring to that needs updating probably isn't data that costs money. It takes time as projects come in, and we ask applicants to collect kind of before and after data. Yeah, I don't think it's a large expense.
Yeah, we still struggle a bit. We're still working on the vehicle mix information, but I think that should be taken care of in future, but that's where we've been struggling with for a while now. So, and Tony, do you know when the final report will be done on this project?
I don't want to get too specific, but I think it's a very few months. We want to circle back with our project management team still, and our technical advisory committee to really finalize things.
Thank you.
And Tony, can I just ask maybe one question? So it's sounded like in going through the presentation, some of these are, or methods like these are used today in the solicitation, or not, or is it all just proxy? Is it all just based on VMT reduction estimates? And is it in all categories? I'm trying to think of the category, for instance, I'm most familiar with is like bikeways and trails, and I can't think of how that's currently measured. Is that happening now, or is this just new and proposed because we are focusing so much more on greenhouse gas in the new solicitation and in the new policy plan?
Yeah, so we're not estimating any greenhouse gas emissions in any of the regional solicitation categories, but we are doing work that's really helpful to get to those estimates. So when we ask a transit applicant, how a project is going to affect ridership, that ridership directly goes to a really solid greenhouse gas estimate. So that's pretty foundational. In the bike ped category, we need two pieces of information. We need ADT on the road that the facility's on, or a nearby road, to show how busy that area is, and then the number of these generator destinations. And so that, I believe, would probably be new information. I don't know if the current application requires ADT or not, but that's generally, most of the time, it's pretty simple to get from MnDOT's website. Let's see if, yeah, so it's a mix of using current information and requiring some new information, but the ending methods are all new.
Elaine?
We do have ADT current and then forecasted in the application, especially in the roadway. And for the part with the synchro, we're asking for delay reduction. And it does specifically for the synchro, we do pull out calculations for CO, NOx, and VOC emissions, whatever those are. So those are the three. And I don't know if those are how they're associated with greenhouse gas versus their different types of emissions.
Yeah, the greenhouse gas emissions are different than criteria pollutants, but there's definitely overlap. But Synchro has the ability to estimate greenhouse gas emissions. We didn't use it because some of the factors were old, so we used the estimate of fuel consumption, and then from that we were able to get to greenhouse gas emissions.
So yeah, we just look at delay reduction in the pollutants then.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, thanks, Tony. Sounds like a lot of hard work. Probably much of it was probably beyond my level of comprehension, but I'm glad there are people like you working on it. So thank you for bringing it to the committee and giving us the presentation. Let's see. We have one more information item. And I think we have Steve Peterson joining us, and this is the regional solicitation evaluation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like we need a seventh inning stretch here, just to stretch it out a little bit. But this one, we don't have to go the whole time here, but did want to give you an update on where we're at, and also let you know that TAC planning is important to the regional solicitation, as really the next several months we'll be talking about a lot of things that you discuss here, most prominently connection between this funding source and the TPP that just got approved, and measurement tools and targets and all these things that come through TAC planning. So that's the primary reason to come here today, to give you an update and let you know we'll be hopefully tapping you in the future too for your expertise. We did have 3 discussion questions that we put, I guess slide 15 of this one here, Jed. Oh, so close. Nope, back up one.
Don't have them on the slide, but I have them on the agenda.
Yeah. And so these are the questions to be thinking through, I guess, in the presentation. Number 1, would this draft structure provide a clearer connection to the 2050 transportation policy plan than the current structure? What technical questions do you have on the potential application structure? Number 2, and lastly, do you have any comments that you'd like for us to forward to the regional solicitation policy work group that's meeting next week, Wednesday before TAB? So those are the 3 questions we have for you. Again, so this is a multi-year project called the Regional Solicitation Evaluation. Primary goal is to better connect what's now the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan and Imagine 2050 to funding decisions. And you can see what those goals are at the bottom of the page here. Next slide. One more. We've done about 15 to 18 months here of the study so far, and a lot of it's been background work, but we did go out and meet with 25 stakeholder groups roughly a year ago here. And these are some of the themes that we heard from people, both what they liked and they would like to keep in the regional solicitation, but also things they'd like to improve upon. So this first part of the study effort was looking at the overall structure and application categories. And we thought that best aligned with the feedback that we heard that projects should better align with the regional policy goals, and that the current structure makes it difficult to focus funding on the desired outcomes such as safety and to quantify overall outcomes. So again, a lot of TAC planning concepts there, but that's really where we're working from right now. Some of those other things that you see there make the application easier. Projects in suburban rural areas do not compete well in the bike ped categories. Make it easier, create more opportunities for local governments. Those are all things that we are going to tackle over the next year. But right now we're still at the high level of what the overall structure should look like. Next slide, please. We don't need to go through all these, but we have, it is kind of nice to just chronicle some of the meetings that we've had this calendar year from both the technical perspective and the policymakers, and you can kind of through that at your leisure. But next slide. One more. So that's the policy work group, and then lastly, there was this technical steering committee of last January 28th, and you can see some of the questions we're still tackling and on that. And still, a lot of people want to get to the details here, and you can even see this in some of the comments. But hopefully we will be getting there a few months down the road. Next slide. But today we really want to talk about the overall structure, and we're calling this a modal plus hybrid structure because it has many of the elements that you're familiar with in the past, but also does provide some benefits to, and we'll talk about some of the challenges that we had with the existing structure and meeting some of the new goals that we have for the region. So next slide. So here's the current structure, and it's based on modes. So tab before the solicitation is released as part of the application, they'll say we want to put funding range of this to this for bike bed, this for transit, this for roadways, and then we have application categories under those three modal structures. During our listening sessions and talking to groups, we heard a couple challenges with this structure. One, some of the newer areas like EV charging, different forms of TDM didn't fit well into this modal-based structure. And number two, when we did the 2024 solicitation, we were asked, well, by tab, can you put together a safety funding scenario? And that was difficult to do with our current structure to say, here's a set of projects that maximizes safety, for instance. So those are kind of the two things that we were working with that we said didn't work well with the current system. So next slide. You'll see over the next few slides kind of the progression of how we got to what we're proposing now compared to what we have right now. So then we started thinking about the 2050 goal areas. And again, you'll start to see those populate across the top of these pages. So dynamic and resilient is across the top. And so people still had a fondness, I'll say, for the modal funding categories. We heard that especially from the technical folks that they did like that familiarity of the modal structure, but we did have to solve these other challenges that I talked about. So we in talking with the policymakers, we merged what was the climate and natural system goal areas, and that could cover like EV charging, TDM, and resiliency type application categories. And again, these are in the boxes are proposed future application categories. And I'll say nothing's been approved at this point. We're still talking with policy and technical groups and tweaking the wording, but I think there is fairly good agreement that we're probably 75% of the way there at this point. So next slide, please. So the green box kind of covered some of these new areas that didn't fit well into the modal-based structure. And then again, the second maybe challenge was we know that one of the things that TAB really has been focusing on is safety. And so we thought maybe we should pull out safety out of the modal funding areas, and then TAB can say, we want to put X million dollars this cycle towards safety, and they could have a kind of a clear policy choice as to they're putting it towards that objective. So the next slide. So then we've moved in this example structure, we've moved safety out of bike ped and roadways and put it into a new category called safety. So again, the kind of the working example that's shown here is that people liked the HSIP funding and said, when we did our before and after study, we looked at projects back from 2014 and said both the roadway projects and the HSIP projects, and we looked at the safety outcomes that both of those had, which was largely positive, but the HSIP projects that were funded back again in the 2014 cycle had better outcomes. And part of the reason why we think is because those applications were highly focused on safety. So our technical working group for this study said, well, what if we do something similar to HSIP? We still keep MnDOT Metro District's pot of money for HSIP. And remember that maximum award there is $2 million. So it's more, maybe can hit kind of one intersection or wider shoulders or some other small improvement. But we kind of try and hit the next maybe larger project type in safety, either kind of multiple intersections along a corridor or a corridor wide treatment. And we use our regional solicitation funding, federal funding, to do that. So again, you'd still have the HSIP program, but this would be a safety focused category that would be just a little bit bigger than a singular intersection would provide money for. And you'll see a few other things on this chart, and maybe this is a good one to come back to at the end here, Madam Chair, but we're starting to think about too, this active transportation dollars. And that's really not the question we're asking the policymakers yet, but we're starting to think about, well, if we, which of these project types would make most sense for that $24 million a year that goes to TAB as active transportation dollars? And so we've kind of started that discussion a little bit here and talking to especially the technical folks of saying they don't want to intermix that money, and smaller project types that you don't have to federalize is probably a good thing to use the regional sales tax dollars on versus federally fund. So again, this isn't kind of 100%, and no one's kind of blessed this as this is the path forward, but this is after several meetings of working through it and hearing from policymakers on where they want to put the money. This is kind of the latest and greatest where we're at today. Again, maybe the last thing to mention here. So this back one slide here, Jed, sorry. This would cover, you can see across the top, all safety, dynamic resilient, and then climate and natural systems together as environment would be the 4 goal areas. And then equity, what we've heard to date from the policymakers, there wouldn't be an equity application category, at least not yet. But that could be embedded within either the scoring or the qualifying requirements across the applications, maybe similar to what it is today. Next slide. So all those application categories that you saw in the last slide would all tie back to 2050 TPP objectives and policies. And so we just kind of truncated that a little bit into a few words, but we're always cognizant of how does this tie back to the TPP and making that clear connection. Next slide. Okay, one more. Here's a few of the meetings that we have. And again, Tony had mentioned the special issue working groups, which we're hoping to start really over the next several months here. And probably we'll have upwards of maybe 7 or so special issue working groups, some of which one of them would be kind of the climate, GHG, EV, and then we'll have some other ones we're going to talk to the policymakers about next Wednesday here, but probably based on mode, bike ped, transit, roadways, safety, climate, equity, TD and TDM might be the 7th one there. So these are, again, some of the upcoming meetings. We're going to be coming to the committees a lot here, and it's really helped actually to get some feedback. So again, what we're asking here today of you is, do you have any technical questions on the structure? how do you think so far it fits with the new 2050 TPP? Is there any messages that we want to send as technical staff back to the policymakers next Wednesday here? So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you and go from there. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And I've heard various versions of this presentation since I attend TAC, but it may be new for, I don't know how often this has been to TAC planning.
Never. I don't think.
Okay, I didn't think so
Maybe
either.
Not for a while, at least.
I'm never sure. My memory's short, so you could have come last month and I probably wouldn't know. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But does anyone want to start us off with a comment or a question? And it looks like Jed put the discussion prompts in the chat again. Thank you, Jed. That's helpful. Okay, either everyone's tired or they have heard this before. I have heard this before, but I guess I do have a question, Steve, and maybe let me see. Could you go to the slide where you have the TPP goals, or let's see slide. That one? Yeah, those ones. Okay, so I guess in just looking at these, and I went to the bigger workshop where we took all of the objectives, and I think however many were there, like 31, and we had to decide whether they should become categories for applications, scoring criteria, or something else. So what from the TPP, I guess, what do you think, is there anything missing? Like, I know we talked about what to do with equity, and I don't see that under any of these. So are there major areas of the TPP that are not in these 3 buckets that we would need to integrate in some other way? And I know you used equity as the example. That could be a qualifying criteria or a scoring measure. Are there any others like that are not kind of reflected here?
Yeah, maybe go back one more slide here, Jed, if you would, please. So yeah, I think you provided some good context. So in December, we had a policymaker work group that was well attended, and we gave them objectives and policies from the draft TPP at that point that had a regional solicitation focus, and said, this is a special funding source. While it's a decent chunk of money, at the same rate, it's only 2% of our overall funding. So it's really a special funding source, but it's very flexible, and we can do it a lot of things. On all these policies and actions and objectives, where would you like to focus our attention in spending this $125 million of federal funds and $24 million of active transportation funds? And that's how we came out with the list in many of these application categories, and the objectives you see on the next slide is because those are the top 10 to 12 that came out of that policy workshop. And I'd say the one that was tougher to maybe that people didn't see as a application category were both the natural systems and equity. Those 2 received lower scores for being actual application categories, but people, it seemed, wanted to include them in other ways. And that's fine too, scoring or qualifying requirements. So I think the natural systems and equity are maybe the 2 examples that didn't show up prominently, like we want to make this an application category, but you will see them in other ways, and we need to be kind of cognizant at the end of this process that we've done that. But like the blue box, dynamic and resilient, that's where we heard from the policymakers. That's where they wanted to spend, and the safety. I'd say the red boxes and the blue boxes, those are the most popular ones that we heard. With the exception, maybe EV charging was another one that came up a lot in infrastructure too. So
Okay, thanks. And then, and just looking ahead, could you give maybe an example of if something was a qualifying criteria versus a scoring measure? Maybe using equity as example, because that's what has come up. Just so I think it can be sometimes hard to visualize like how this would actually play out, and it helps me to think of examples. I don't know if you guys have gotten that far yet, but like what would a qualifying criteria for equity be, or how would it look differently if it was a scoring measure?
Yeah, so for equity, you could think of something like all projects must do an analysis of the people living within a half mile of the project area, of kind of who's living there, and so that might be every project has to do that. That's just kind of the baseline qualifying requirement that you'd have to submit as part of the application process. Another one that fits under equity is things related to ADA compliance. Fits under that equity goal area. If it was a scoring measure, it might be something similar as it is today, where you give it a certain amount of points, and based on your response to the question, then you're given X amount of points. So those would be maybe the two differences, and from an equity perspective, or it could be both, to be seen. But that will be one of the special issue working groups. Will be an equity group that will try and figure that out.
Okay, and that has yet to be convened, or the group has not been identified yet?
Yeah, it hasn't. So thanks. Next Wednesday, we're going to be going to the policy work group, and we're going to say, we've got 7 proposed special issue working groups, and just to make sure that we're going on the right track, which I think we are. That covers many of the columns that you see here, plus equity. Okay, you
Chris.
got them going now.
Little tap dancing, it works sometimes. Chris, and then Elaine.
Madam Chair, I made this comment at the TAC too. I feel like with equity, I think it's pretty clearly defined, I think, the way you're describing equity, but I'm wondering about the intersectionality between that and regional balance. That always seems to come up.
Yes.
And I would be curious, I think about my situation in Woodbury, we have different dynamics, but I'm a little worried about, okay, now we talk about regional balance and we're moving around on where the equity is. And I'm worried about the messaging that might occur during that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members. It's a good question. We've been trying to keep those two topics as separate, but I will say that people use the same terminology quite often, even at the tab level. So equity we're talking about and MnDOT has a pretty good definition. We've got our equity evaluation that had a definition for it. Is specific to certain populations. Geographic balance is really more how we disperse the funding throughout the region to different parts of the region. We view that as a different topic, but I'll say we've heard a lot about geographic balance too. And that was one of the 5 things on that earlier slide of things we've heard. It was in that case, it was specific to bike ped investment and not being able to kind of disperse that throughout the region. But I think those are 2 separate issues, and both are important moving forward. But we're probably going to think about them as separate. That answers the question, or?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I think they're 100% separate and distinct.
Yep.
I just would hate to say, okay, well, now we're going to have regional balance be more important than equity, if that was the instance. And I don't like the lens that might occur if that discussions were to happen.
Yep. Thank you for that feedback.
Right.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I figured that. My comment was more continuation on the previous point about when the work groups are scheduled or getting set up. We're going to be looking for volunteers, so start thinking about which groups that you or your staff would be interested in working on. We'll be probably reaching out to all the committee members and hopefully get them started meeting by end of March and April, May, get them going full speed at that time.
Okay, thanks. Chad.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question on the introduction of that regional active transportation funding there under the bicycle and pedestrian. And, just want to reemphasize one of the goals, I think, of the regional solicitation evaluation is to make the application easier to apply for, less effort, maybe. I think that's something that we're just kind of monitoring and watching and making sure if it is tied to this process that those who may not have applied to regional solicitation in the past because of the effort or the cost to hire a consultant or something like that, would still be able to have a chance at that funding. So, yet to be determined on the actual effort to apply, but just wanted to mention that again. Thanks.
Thanks, Chad. And I think, Steve, am I correct that regional active transportation funding, is there a separate path that's being looked at? Like there's a separate work group, or there was? Maybe that was just for the last solicitation. Are they combined now, or is it separate still?
Yeah, there is an active transportation group that is largely policymakers with a few technical folks sprinkled in, and so that group hopefully will be meeting in the next few weeks again to talk about it. But I'd say if I were maybe to summarize what I've heard from technical staff so far, don't mix the money up, federal and the sales tax. Make it easier to apply. We do have those 7 requirements that are in the state law for kind of at a minimum level we have to include with those applications. That money's being managed through the Met Council versus through the state aid process. So that's another difference. And we're already started the grant agreements on the 18 projects that were selected last cycle. But I think some of the interesting questions coming up would be for the active transportation is this kind of the universe of what that group wants to use for active transportation, or are there others like we've heard planning? And maybe that would be a decent one not to federalize too if people want to do some planning grants related to bike ped or complete streets. And then, certainly that group had lots of other discussions on other ideas, and we just have to make sure it kind of ties back to the TPP. But bike sharing was one. Other operational kind of things like that. Maybe a larger project that have regional impact. So and then maybe the last question is kind of the timing, because there's some people said, well, let's do it all at the same time with every 2 years with the regional solicitation. Then there may be some onus or some thoughts about doing it in an off year. So you do active transportation 1 year, regional solicitation the next year, and a cycle such as that. So those are kind of some interesting questions that we're gonna have to tackle in the next few months and see what makes sense. So
thanks. Kevin.
Thanks. Ramsey County's prepared an ADA transition plan, and I know ADA improvements often get sort of built into other projects like a street reconstruction or transitway improvements. They kind of go along with those bigger projects. Ramsey County is interested maybe in focusing ADA compliance and making that a focus of improvements rather than an add-on. Steve, can you tell me, would ADA improvements in a corridor and a network, would that be a safety improvement? Would that be local pedestrian connections? or would it maybe not apply to the new categories we're looking at here? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair and members. So it's a good question. One of the advantages of a program or a structure like this is that you could different project types could be submitted in different areas depending on what the main objective, TPP objective that it's hitting. So with ADA, which is kind of naturally embedded underneath the equity goal area, I could see it here being under kind of the local pedestrian network connections would be maybe one area. I could see it being kind of a proactive safety project would be maybe another one. And you're talking about kind of standalone ADA improvements versus kind of a corridor. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Steve, that's really what I'm looking at is, excessive slopes.
Yeah. Yep.
Replacing truncated domes, things like that.
Yeah. So that, to me, that's sounding a little bit like more of a proactive safety, if not a local pedestrian network type project. That was one of the policy areas that we brought to that December workshop, and maybe we didn't have it worded quite well, but didn't receive high marks that should be a separate application category by itself at that time. So that's why we didn't have it included, I guess, and that's why it's not shown as kind of a separate deal. That would be something you'd apply for, just an ADA improvement on a corridor.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Kevin. Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just Steve, back to that regional active transportation funding. I'm having trouble understanding why it's on this slide in the way it is. Is this to show that that's how you could potentially help reach that dynamic goal? But this is a regional solicitation slide here, so and everything you kind of mentioned, that I'm kind of surprised to see it here, if it's likely not going to be here. So I'm not sure if this slide is going to be showing at tab or not, because that's just my thought. I know how obviously as a separate program, it could still help achieve this dynamic goal, but yeah, why is it being shown here, I guess?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair and members. So we're viewing it at and working with a consultant as the broader umbrella is the regional solicitation. There may be different funding sources underneath it, and there may be different timing as to when those applications go out. But still, under this larger regional solicitation is the general kind of process or structure under which that sits. So we may get other funding sources too in the future, and it's just a matter of kind of where does it sit. But I don't know if that answers your question. But at some point, it may split out a little bit more than maybe you're seeing here. But we're just trying to make the dichotomy between what are some things that would be good to fund with federal funds and what would be some things that may be better to fund without federal funds, and start that conversation.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chad, if you had a follow-up.
Yeah, just follow up. Yeah, thanks, Steve, for that. That's not how I was understanding it. So that's very helpful to know that's where you're coming from. I don't know if there's a way to show that umbrella in a flow, like a chart or something, because I think some people think, okay, regional solicitations over here, HSIP is over here, and they're not, they're under federal funding umbrella. But
yep,
if you guys are kind of putting this all under regional solicitation, I don't know, I think it might be good to show that or explain that, or maybe that would help some of us. So yeah, and I think obviously all this goes to meeting our new goal structure, it sounds like. So how do we work towards these goals?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. So good good question. I think all these funding pots, I think we're trying to, again, the whole objective of the study is to how do we connect funding with the Plant 2050 TPP. And so this was our attempt to show that with the active transportation money here too. Need a bigger slide. 11 by 17 next time.
Or more colors. I don't know.
Yeah, more color. We need more colors. Yeah.
Federal versus other sources. I don't know. Anyways, I won't micromanage your slide, but and I don't think it was labeled at that when we saw this last. So these must be kind of evolving. So
yeah, we have several meetings every week with different stakeholders on this project. So and that's maybe since the TAC meeting, was that last week? Yep.
Okay. Probably, I don't even remember, a week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then maybe when I was talking about timeline, you probably mentioned it in the beginning, but the goal is to wrap this up and have a recommended, maybe just walk through the approval steps. Are we going to approve different elements of this, like the structure and then the scoring criteria, and then, or will it all get approved as one package, but we're just stepping through these particular elements right now? And then when is the actual solicitation happening?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Madam Chair. So I'm going to add one to number 4 there, and I think that March 13th meeting of this group, if we have it, we'll come back again just because I think there's some good comments and questions. I want to keep this group up to date on it. So our thought is to bring this larger structure in the application categories as an info item, not as an action item, through TAC Planning, F&P, TAC, and then TAB, ending in mid-April. And at which point we'll be starting all these special issue working groups to dig into the measures, minimum, maximum, all the fun stuff. With the goal of this fall having an completed application that would kind of go through the committees and go out for public review this fall. And a solicitation would be somewhere on the open application period, would be something like February to April of 2026. And project selection kind of fall of 2026.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. People have asked me internally, and I know I've seen these presentations over and over again, but I'm losing track of the overall timeline, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that would be a good slide to actually add to some of these presentations too, so people are just kind of, it's so far up, and at the same time, I know a lot of the agencies are planning in the near term for what they may apply for next year. So
yeah, well, thank you. We used up pretty much the 2 hours. So unless anyone has anything else they'd like to ask or comment on, I'm going to close that item. Is there any other business for the committee before we adjourn? Any announcements or anything else from any members? All right, seeing none. Thank you everyone for hanging on. I know we don't always meet for the full 2 hours, so thanks. And for staff for bringing these information items to us. And we will see you maybe next month. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.